Thank you for tuning in to an old episode, a past guest of our Why Me Project rerun.
Something that we're starting now because there are so many episodes that we really did love, and they've kind of disappeared from the digital world.
And speaking of digital world, I did a little recon. There are at least 9 different platforms in which you can listen to the Why Me Project podcast.
Okay.
So there's no excuses, but I mean, some of the main ones like Apple Podcast and or Spotify.
And you could always head to our social media accounts to stay up to date, as each and every Wednesday we have a brand new episode for Why Me Project. And you can also let us know if there's someone that you would like to hear on a future episode.
At Why Me Project on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Why Me Project at Outlook.com. He's a part of I Am Second. We're going to dive more into his life. And Doug Bender, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Well, we like to ask this skill testing question because we never know where it's going to go. Doug, who are you and where did you come from?
Oh, wow. Well, I have come from lots of places. I've grown up mostly along the East Coast, a few different states. I'm currently in Pittsburgh, and I'm a pastor and a writer, and I work for a ministry called I Am Second.
With life growing up, did you end up moving a lot?
I did. I moved in a couple places in upstate New York, and then I was in Virginia, a couple different places, and I wound up in Texas for a while. And
so if you were to call home, where would that be?
I usually tell people I grew up in New York, but now I'm from Pittsburgh.
Okay. Now Pittsburgh is where the heart is.
Now you had mentioned you'd mentioned author and writer and pastor. Was that what you wanted to be when you grew up, or what were your goals?
Well, my goals are pretty much the opposite of all of those things. So I always look forward to the week where we could skip church and writing in English class was my worst.
Yeah.
So I don't know how this happened. I guess that's what God does sometimes. But this is pretty much the opposite. And it wasn't really until I was about 16, and I told God that I wanted to tell people what I had just discovered about him. And I had just discovered that God loved me. I knew he loved the world. I didn't know he loved me. And I wanted to tell people that. I didn't know what that meant, but I wanted to do that.
When you were growing up, was church and God a part of your family culture?
It certainly was. Yeah, we were in church pretty much every time the doors were open. We were 3 times a week kind of family, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. So I always knew who God was. I knew he was out there. The question I ran into is one that a lot of people that grew up in church might run into is, I know God is there, but does God care about me specifically and my issues? And that was the question I found myself running into.
16 was kind of that moment. Was that the pivotal moment where you got the answers?
Yeah, I think it was. It's sometimes I feel like it's a little bit of a silly story, but it was not silly to me. But I had a birthday party when I was younger before then, and nobody showed up. And I was kind of a kid that, got picked on a bit at school, and I had a hard time making friends, and I moved around a lot, and that made it harder. And so I had this prayer I'd ask God. I said, God, I just want one friend. I want somebody to show up and care. Long story short, I had this 16th birthday party, and I wasn't really expecting anybody to show up, and my house was filled with people. And I knew that it was God answering a very specific prayer. It may not be a big deal for most people, but for my 16-year-old self, it was everything.
Looking back on it now, because I know that there's definitely people who maybe are going through what you went through. Maybe it's people who have been through what you've gone through as well. Why was friends difficult for you to make? Why did you feel, looking at, growing up, Doug, what was it about you that you just had that loneliness, had that problem?
There's a lot of factors. One of the things I got stuck on was I had a lot of negative thinking and self-consciousness stuck in my head. I really got to this point where I didn't like myself, and I figured if I don't like me, surely nobody likes me. And it's awfully hard to make friends if you think nobody could possibly like you. There was a bit of a long journey God had to bring me on to eventually convince me that he made me and he's a big fan. I wasn't quite there, and I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, and understanding that God designed me specifically was a really important aspect, a really important point that I needed to grasp and really trust God with to get to that point where I could, I guess you could say, accept love.
Why did you guys move around so much when you were growing up?
Yeah, it was just job stuff. You know, my dad just followed the jobs, and my parents have always had various businesses they've run. We had a pizzeria for a while, and we did an upholstery business for a while, and now they sell handbags. You know, the nature of traveling around where the business would work. It meant that I was out and about a bit.
Did your parents have any idea that you were going through these inner struggles?
I don't think they did. I also was very slow to share much of this, and I think I also was pretty slow to really be able to articulate it myself. I think a lot of this I could just look back and see it, and that's pretty common. A lot of times when you're going through something, this is true for most folks, is you ask, like, you know, why me, and you think you're the only one. And really you're not. But when you get stuck there, you think it's just me and nobody could understand, so I'm all alone. I can't tell anybody. And that's a very common thing. It's something I really struggle with, and it's why I had a hard time sharing this with anybody.
So you get this aha moment at 16. Do you see, I mean, even whether your 16-year-old self or looking back on it, that you saw an immediate and big change?
You know, it's a complicated answer. I think there was some immediate change. There's also some process I think God had to bring me through. But the immediate change was that I had a new confidence, a confidence that I am loved. I had found this love in my life that I didn't know I had. I didn't know somebody cared specifically about me. And so when I realized that, I could suddenly become a person that could give love. When you don't think anybody loves you, it's hard to give it. And so that also makes it hard to have relationships, whether that be friendships or later on, romance and family. It's hard to do any of those relationships if you can't first know that you are someone worth loving. So that was something I think I had an immediate change, even though there was still plenty of baggage to unpack.
So you graduate then high school. What is then the next step? Are you, okay, now you want to become a counselor? Now you want to be a pastor because you just want to be able to share all of this knowledge that you have?
I told God that day when I realized that he loved me, I said, God, this is the words I said to him. I said, God, I had no idea. I didn't know you loved me. I knew you loved the world. I didn't know you loved me. And I grew up in church.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure if I didn't know, there's a ton of people out there that don't know. So I want to go tell those people, whoever they are. And I didn't know what that would look like, but I did have a youth pastor in my life that had been a big part of teaching me that and showing me that. And so I figured, well, I don't know what it means to go and tell people Jesus loves them, but my youth pastor did a good job, so why don't I just go do what he did? And so I went to the school he went to, and I decided to go be a youth pastor like he did, and I just started on that path. I had a couple of turns along the way, but I just figured, I know that guy, a guy named Ryan Jasper. I'm still friends with him. I'm just going to do what he does.
Sounds like he was a great role model to have.
Yeah, he's, it's funny. He's the one that being that I moved around a lot, I don't have a lot of friendships that go really far back in my personal timeline, but his is one that I've maintained. I think he's probably one of my oldest friends at this point now. Though I never ended up being like a youth pastor, I did end up working with young people, and that's how I eventually wound up with a ministry called I Am Second, where we reach young people online. And I think it was kind of born out of that original following in his footsteps. So though my ministry looks a bit different than his did, I've definitely taken a lot with him.
So how did I Am Second come to fruition?
Yeah, it was meant to be this local ministry. I was living in Dallas at the time, and it was meant to be this local outreach right there in our city of Dallas to tell the people in our city that there is someone bigger than your hero, right? That there is someone first. And we put up on these billboards and commercials, and everywhere you went in the city, we had these pictures of famous people that you would think are at the top of their game in music, sports, whatever. You think these guys are first, and they were all announcing that they were second. And it was very intriguing to folks because they're like, well, hey, I know this person. This is my favorite guitarist or my favorite baseball player, and how are they second? Who's first? And so That was the thing that got people to the website. And eventually, this was back in 2008, and it really took off. We aimed for a city, and we ended up getting basically the world. It went to over 100 countries within just a couple weeks, and it went viral before people really talked about things going viral, because people really resonated with these stories of these people that, while on the outside they look famous and something different than you, they really are all dealing with very similar struggles, and they have found that putting Jesus first is really what fixes all the brokenness in our lives.
So were you at I Am Second from the ground level, from the very start?
I think the team started to form and coalesce and put together the videos and films and such about, like the summer or spring before I joined. Website launched in December of 2008, and I came on the team basically in January. So very soon after I was starting, I just came on. I was an intern. I was doing some writing for some of the small group curriculum for folks that said, hey, can we take these films and do like a small group with them? So I was in charge of writing that up, and my role has just kind of grown and morphed over the years. And now I pretty much do anything that's longer than a tweet. Is usually what I'm writing. So we have someone that does the social media, but I do most of the other writing for the organization, including from a web copy all the way up to our books.
When did the love of writing and creating content for people to grow in their faith start?
At the same time I had joined with I Am Second, I was also working with a parent organization, a group called E3 Partners, in a place called Ethiopia. I was a missionary, and I would travel in and out. And this is a very oral culture, meaning everything is communicated via a story spoken out loud. And I just fell in love with the power of story. I watched people's lives change by just hearing the stories of Jesus. And so when I Am Second started, and it was really basically an adaptation of that same principle, but with the internet. Mm-hmm. So we had people sitting down and telling the stories of Jesus. And so I think that was very pivotal. And then just watching people actually interact in the written version of things, it really was like, wow, I think I didn't think I would enjoy this, but I really enjoy telling the stories of what God is doing, both as recorded in the Bible, and he's still doing stuff, our modern day stories.
What's it like for you being on the infancy phase of I Am Second to then, as you said, it was viral before viral was a thing, and you see this explosion. You probably thought like, oh my goodness, my writing that's longer than a tweet is now being seen by so many.
Yeah, it was a strange experience at first, realizing that there's folks all over the world reading this stuff. I remember there was this one guy named Remy Adelike. He's actually on our website in this upcoming book that we found. He was in the military. He was at a forward position out in the Afghan wars, and he was downloading our stuff and doing like Bible studies with our I Am Second curriculum. Wow. Way out in the middle of nowhere. Further, it was so far outside the bases, they didn't have chaplain access. So this guy was just using our stuff because he's like, well, I'm not a chaplain, but I guess I can do this. And that was a moment for me where I realized, wow, I guess this can really have some legs, that people are using this everywhere.
You go from being this shy person, you say, friendships are difficult. You don't necessarily have those, all those solid friends. And you also said that romance is difficult. At any point in time, as you started to get more confident in who you were, did the romance thing and the marriage and finding that special someone ever come to fruition? Yeah,
it's my last year in college. I met this girl named Catherine, and I still really got over my shyness in terms with girls, and I was just totally terrified. But you know what, Catherine, I guess she wasn't quite so afraid. And one day she emailed me her phone number and said, just in case you want to call me. And that was the girl I married.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So she kind of helped me out, and when I was too nervous to ask her on our second date, she asked me on the second date.
Good for her.
She kind of helped me out, and I was thankful she was a little more bold than I was. But yeah, now I'm still learning and I'm growing, I think I still have a habit of not opening up and having that shy thing. Even though I'm not so shy anymore, I still am slow sometimes to open up. But she is very much the opposite. So it's been a good match, and I think that's what God does sometimes, is he tends to put the right people in our lives to shore up some of our weaknesses and let our strength shine on the other side.
I love it. She noticed you noticing her and noticing and the rest is history.
That's right.
What has been your biggest takeaway about yourself now being a married man and walking that journey?
Yeah, I think there's certainly been a lot there. I found it fascinating, though, that the more our family grows, we've got 4 kids now, the more I see some of those analogies in the Bible, the more, power I see in them. The analogy that we are like Jesus' bride, or God the Father is our Father. And now that I'm a spouse and a father, I'm seeing some of these things in a deeper way and realizing, so when Jesus gave his son for the world, this is what it must have felt like, because my son just stubbed his toe and my heart broke.
Yeah.
It's just like I realized some of the simple truths that you know on paper, but when you experience it in like your own relationships, I found that all to be very eye-opening.
As you're growing up, you mentioned that you're this shy kid. Now you have children of your own. As a parent, are you pressing into your children differently in hopes that maybe they don't have the same experiences that you did?
Yeah, I think I am more sensitive to some of those issues. I know, like my oldest kid, she's 10. Her name's Bethany. She's always been a very outgoing personality, and I think I've had just a lot of conversations, just like, hey, you are someone that's got a gift at making friends. You're going to find people that don't know how to have friendship, and you need to go find them and be friends with them. Just teach them how to be friends, because they won't know how, and they'll be lonely. And I think those conversations, I don't think I would have had if it wasn't for my own upbringing. And now I've got my third child, Bella, is extremely quiet, and it's like I know it's in her head because that was me. And it's just interesting. That's all in the same family. But, it certainly does affect some of the conversations we have and even just how we interact, just trying to, help them see some of the things I learned. Hopefully they can learn it in an easier path than some of my journey.
I want to talk about the book, I Found Love, which was released last week. But before I get to that, when it comes to you and your writing, and I mean, you started doing one certain thing and, as we joke, longer than a tweet. What is the biggest struggle that you find, or the biggest need and the best reaction that people get with regards to your writing, or just writing for I Am Second in general?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have found most connects with people, and something that we are always striving, our whole team here, me being the one that writes a lot of it, has a lot of time to aim towards it. And it's this idea of authenticity of, all our stories are messy. People's lives, even when you have that Jesus moment, you still are going to need another one tomorrow because you're going to mess up. And being open about that kind of stuff and making sure our stories aren't these like crystalline, perfect narratives of, hey, Jesus found this person and loved him and now they're perfect. So we don't really tell that story. That's not really the story that happens. We're all pretty messy moving forward, and it's this journey. So that part of the writing and of what we do, and this is something that I try to make sure I carry whenever I'm writing a story or blog article, or for that matter, even if I'm doing the occasional social media post, we try to make sure people can see that, the messier side of life, and realize that Jesus still loves you. And he's still got a plan for your life, and you messing up doesn't change that.
That was one thing I think that stood out for me the first time I saw an I Am Second video, which would have been probably back in 2008, was the fact that these stories were so raw and so real, and it's so relatable. For you, is there, if you can pick one or maybe two, stories that really spoke to you that you've heard over the years?
Oh, man, yeah, there's obviously lots of stories. I think I answer that question differently each time I'm asked, but because it's like asking what's your favorite kid.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
I have lots of them, and I love them all for different reasons. But I think my one I'm feeling particularly drawn to at the moment is we have this one story. It's in the book, too, It's between Beth Nemo and T.J. Stevens. Beth Nemo is the mother of the first girl who was killed in the Columbine tragedy. T.J. Stevens is someone who was a part of a school shooting at a separate incident. He was the shooter.
Yeah.
And we actually had them to sit down, and we heard their stories, and it was amazing to watch what God does, because these are people that experienced events on the very different end. The one Beth needed to know, what can God do with my loss? And TJ needed to know, I have royally screwed up my life and the lives of others. What could God possibly do with me? And yet God had an answer for both of them. And at the end, after they both shared their story, they came in their room together. You just saw this healing, this moment of she's extending grace and empowerment, and he's learning what grace is, and that kind of thing is exactly what God designed. It was really designed us for, is to replicate the grace that he shares and the healing that he gives. And I think that story is one that was very, very moving for me to experience and to be able to put on paper.
So we've talked about it, we've alluded to it, but I Found Love, True Stories of Discovering Love, Belonging, and Friendship. Why write the book?
We have a love deficit, really. I think there's so many people that they're just lonely, and they don't realize. I think that one of the things I learned early on, I thought I was the only lonely person. And I learned pretty quick off that actually pretty much everyone is lonely at some point. They wonder when was the last time I had a real conversation? When was the last time I feel like I got together with a friend that actually cares about me, not just likes to hang out, or is struggling in a marriage relationship or in a parent-child relationship. These are things that all of us are working on and dealing with and struggling with, and now, we didn't know this when we were first putting this book together, but now we've had a year where half of us can't even get out of our house, and we're even more lonely. And so this is coming at a very needy time, and that people are needing to know, what can God do with my relationships? And he can do big things. So that's a message everybody needs to hear, and I think this book is very timely for that.
It's funny because I think in some ways you've answered my next question, which is, what is the hope, what is the prayer that people will get from this?
I want people to know that they can find love too. When you're having those moments, when you're having those relationship struggles, God can show up, God can heal, and even when relationships here on earth get broken and they don't heal, he can step in. I mentioned Remy earlier on. He's one that kind of grew up without a father in his life, and that's one of those stories I've always really loved. Because for him, his journey with God has been really his journey to discover that though his father here on earth passed away, his father in heaven never will. And whether you have a relationship that is forever broken here or not, God's relationship is forever. And he's there for you and wants to show you his love. And that's the kind of love that we all are looking for. We all need to find. So hopefully this book will inspire people to accept that love.
How did you go about finding and selecting the individuals for the book?
When we're looking for stories, there's so many great stories out there.
Yeah.
But we're always looking for kind of two main things. Is we want one that really shares that story of change when Jesus comes into their lives and comes first, what happens. In particular instance of this book, we wanted it to be a story involving relationships, But then secondly, we wanted stories that had a broad appeal in the sense that we wanted them to be different kinds of stories, because God doesn't get stumped by our particular situations. And if we tell the same story from the same perspective, from the same background, we wonder, well, maybe God can only heal a person 35 to 40 when they're in a middle-income urban setting. Mm-hmm. And, well, it's not how God works. He's not tripped up by our circumstances. In fact, I think he enjoys it. And so we try to tell a very broad series of stories, too. So really those two main things, and I think that's what we cover in our website, but also throughout this book. There's just so many different kinds of stories, but they all have a very similar theming, and that you see it's Jesus coming in and healing and providing love, love, belonging, and friendship. But they come from vastly different backgrounds.
Well, I mean, as you go through other people's stories, you have your very own story. And we kind of touched on this a bit earlier on today, but for you and for any Why Me moments in your life, is there anything that stands out?
One of the big things we had to work through, my wife and I, is right after we had our first child, we ended up having a stillborn child. And that was one of those, I said those words, why me? And I had to work through that with God. And I remember coming to that point where I said to God, God, I know you're supposed to have really good plans, and your plans are always better than mine, but God, this looks like a really bad plan. I don't get it. And you know what? The only thing I had to walk away from there is I had to make a choice. Well, will I trust the inventor of the universe, or will I trust myself? Because my own perspective said this doesn't make sense. But I had learned enough of God to that point to realize that He had been trustworthy up till then, and I wasn't going to doubt him at that moment. And I'm glad I hadn't, because He has taught me things and shown me that He can bring us through any of these things and turn good out of even the greatest evils.
I've found love, true stories of discovering love, belonging, and friendship, which is available now. IamSecond.com, at IamSecond on all socials as well. Doug, my friend, appreciate you taking some time and sharing your story.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to an old episode, a past guest of our Why Me Project rerun.
Something that we're starting now because there are so many episodes that we really did love, and they've kind of disappeared from the digital world.
And speaking of digital world, I did a little recon. There are at least 9 different platforms in which you can listen to the Why Me Project podcast.
Okay.
So there's no excuses, but I mean, some of the main ones like Apple Podcast and or Spotify.
And you could always head to our social media accounts to stay up to date, as each and every Wednesday we have a brand new episode for Why Me Project. And you can also let us know if there's someone that you would like to hear on a future episode.
At Why Me Project on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Why Me Project at Outlook.com.